when you and I started our careers, there were a couple of scripts, right? It was vanilla or chocolate.
Right.
Today,
Right.
it's like, what flavor do you want to create when you walk in the ice cream store?
Yeah.
And that's a real challenge.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Pick Now podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Munn. And today we have a great guest, Marc Cabrera. Marc, I got to admit, the reason I wanted to have you on is it feels like your story is a little bit like mine. And I know as we've been talking, we have some commonalities. You had, I had kind of financial services, healthcare into like coaching and small mountain town in Colorado. And you had Wall Street to advising and mentoring and small Colorado mountain town. So welcome. Why don't you tell us a little bit to start about that Wall Street background of yours?
Sure. And by the way, first of all, thank you for having me, Jeff. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I think the fact that we both decided to embed ourselves in small mountain towns says a lot.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, I'm not sure if it's good or bad, but it says something.
Says something about the world, right? I think
it does. Yeah. And I know that's something that immediately caught my attention when we met was that you live, Colorado terms down the street and a couple hours away from me in Telluride. Where I live today and the lifestyle I live today is almost, night and day from where I started when I started on Wall Street. I grew up went to college in New England area, went in Boston. Had my heart set on getting an analyst job in New York on Wall Street. At the time, investment banking was kind of it was kind of a little bit of an edge in terms of an industry. There were a couple films that had come out at the time that glorified, but also, questioned the character and culture of the industry.
So when is this, Marc? Is this like late 80s,
This is
early
late
90s?
80s, early 90s.
Yeah. So like
films,
Wall Street.
Yeah,
and,
Wall Street with Michael Douglas and Charlie Sheen, Boiler Room. And this, this was a commentary, that film in particular, I think was a commentary by Oliver Stone about the greed is good ethos that pervaded corporate America at the time. Private equity was really just being born at that time. A lot of the knowledge and sort of, there was a lot of black box activity in terms of what we did on Wall Street. Why? Because we could afford the Bloomberg terminals and we could get pricing on certain deals. And, today all that information is widely distributed and there is no edge. But I started in a very traditional way as an analyst. It was, literally doing the 90, 100-hour plus work weeks, very little social life, very poor health habits. So and I exited the industry for a while. I did get burned out after kind of a first decade living and working in New York. Ended up moving to South Florida. Got into endurance racing, and that kind of let me recharge my batteries to come back to the industry. And I spent another 20 years operating a nationally focused healthcare services group out of South Florida. We had a very good run.
Yeah, I think I was reflecting as you were talking about this idea when we're young of what does success look like? And so for you, it was like success is I go be an investment banker on Wall Street. And the way that I get there is I become an analyst, right? And for me, it was success is like I'm going to go to law school and work in a law firm and become a partner at a law firm. So very, very similar idea of like, what does success look like and what do I need to do and do to myself? Because I had that same kind of burnout and I had panic attacks and self-medication and the whole thing. And I think that's fascinating. And I think it's something that I see is a little bit of a change now, that maybe more young people are questioning that idea than were when you and I were coming of age.
I see the same thing culturally today. I mean, I think what you're talking about, Jeff, is a script.
Mm-hmm.
The script I was handed as a young adult wasn't really my own.
Yeah.
It was a script that I copied from my father. My father grew up very poor, put himself through college, got a degree in accounting, went the corporate route, and had a fabulous career that really leveled him up from where he started. And so that was the narrative at home. That was the script that generally people followed. And I remember it well because when I was graduating from college, I went to a very small college in New England called Babson.
Mm-hmm.
There were, maybe 1,600 students, and everybody said, well, where are you going to go get a job after you graduate? And most of the students who attended college were from New England, and most of them got a job in New England. And it was kind of like,
Boston, right?
In Boston area. And it's a script, right?
Yeah.
So I was one of the ones who wanted to push the edge of the script, right? And move to New York City, which in that day was kind of a bold move. I mean, New York City was dangerous when I lived there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think today, a couple things have happened that have caused people to question, especially younger adults, to question that script. Let's put COVID aside for a second, because I think COVID amplified those existential questions for everybody, regardless of what stage you're in life. But for young adults, a lot of the pieces of the bargain that I thought were in place when I grew up are gone, right? So when my father grew up, he worked with the goal of getting a defined benefit pension plan.
Yeah.
And those kind of disappeared in the 90s and 2000s. And then today I see the same thing happening with health insurance. Health insurance is kind of it's more than a corporate perk. It is a pillar that I think causes people to really question, do I want to leave corporate? Do I want to do this? But the same thing that happened with pension plans is happening with medical benefits today. It's not going to show up in headlines. It's not an Instagram post. It is simply, this year, the amount you have to contribute is higher, or we're going to switch you over to a high deductible. And you've got, so these things that are, I think of, the shifting the tectonic plates beneath you that you don't realize maybe until a decade or two later. And you go, oops, I didn't really plan for this. And I think young adults are questioning what's the script they want to follow. And I think the good news is you can draft a lot of different versions of that today. I don't think we could back in the day.
Yeah, I think that's right. And my oldest is here visiting. They live in Pittsburgh, and we had a conversation. And we were talking about, I don't know, when I was growing up, or like careers, but the topic of pensions came up. And my oldest asked, what's a pension? And I thought, wow, we have you and I are like, pensions, that's kind of the good old days, right? To not even knowing what a pension is.
For a generation, maybe two generations. I mean, certainly for the silent generation, that ended, I think, if you were born in 1945, right? So you were sort of becoming a young working adult at a time when pensions were almost guaranteed. I mean, today, I think the job market is very different if you're graduating even from a good school like a Babson or, the whole landscape has shifted. And it's something that I think it's easy for older generations to look at young adults today and say, they're not working as hard. It's more about live now,
Right.
worry
Right.
about it later. But I think, I don't think it's fair to really blame that younger generation today on what's happening. And a lot of this is happening without their sort of consent.
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
you look at home prices. I mean, home prices for decades inched up a little bit every, couple of years, and it was a very steady asset class. And today people are really questioning the benefit of home ownership. And that's not even something that hit my radar when I grew up.
Well, and the cost of rent compared with what you can earn is like rent is just such a much higher percentage of your take home than it has ever been. So, when you and I were coming out into the workforce, I had my own apartment. I had, and it was, and now like people in any kind of major city, they have to, even Carbondale, it's
Yeah.
over $3,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment. Well, how
Yeah.
many people can manage that?
That's a smaller slice of the population.
Yeah.
Those jobs don't exist here in Telluride. They don't
Yeah.
generally exist in rural America. And so, I know you do coaching. I do coaching as well. And when if I'm coaching someone who's, 45, 50, 55, it's a very different conversation because the narrative is very different that they're operating under versus, I've always prided myself on giving advice to young kids coming out of college because I know firsthand how challenging it is to get, especially onto Wall Street or into high finance, private equity.
Yeah.
It's still a very small percentage of folks who get inside the industry.
So I want to go back to your first decision to leave Wall Street, because I know when I got an opportunity to move to a consulting firm, to move outside of the practice of law, and I was on the partner track at my law firm, and people told me that. And when I was doing that, when I left, it was kind of unheard of for someone on the partner track to leave for another opportunity. Like the partner track it was beginning to change when I was there because of the idea of like a non-equity partnership and some other kinds of ideas that were starting to show up. But I mean, it was like the equivalent of that pension, right? It's like, well, you became a partner or you got tenure, or there are a number of other things in society that show up like this. It's like, well, you were set.
Yeah, you made it through the indentured servitude phase of your career. I was in a very similar place. I was 32 years old, and I there's a couple of very set levels on Wall Street: analyst, associate, vice president, and I had kind of taken a little longer at the earlier stages and flew through the latter stages. And I was also set to become a managing director at Bear Stearns.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, I can't do it. I'm walking off the field.
And what were you having health? What was the thing that's like, yeah, I have to do this?
It was a combination of things. It wasn't a light bulb moment. It wasn't some health scare. It was just, if I keep going in this direction, I'm sure I could have for years. Just, every year I felt a little worse.
Yeah.
And it brings to mind, there's a very famous study that was, I think, first published in the late 2000s about the correlation between income and happiness, or at least that's how the press presented it. And that study's been updated a couple times since, because when it first came out, it said, well, above $75,000 of income, there's no further incremental impact on happiness, which doesn't intuitively make sense.
Right.
The reality is when they updated it, they looked at two scales. One was how happy are you sort of in a day-to-day context, and how happy are you about your life? And I think what occurred to me, and maybe this was something that was more felt than understood, was I certainly wasn't happy in my life day to day, given the work schedule and just how demanding it was. But I was also starting to feel unhappy about my life. And it was the combination of those two things where I said, I know I can come back if I want to. because once you make it to a certain level, same in law, same in private equity, you can always pop in and out. People do it still today. But I just wasn't feeling, it was like, okay, I'm going to become a managing director, but my life isn't going to change.
Right.
I mean, the income probably would.
I might have a nicer house and a nicer car, but my actual quality of life,
it wasn't going to change. I actually had more fun as an analyst and associate than I did as a VP and director, because at least at that young age, it's kind of like you're given orders, go do this, finish it, get it done in time. Mm-hmm. When you get older, you start absorbing the stress of having to make certain decisions. And the structure of the team that I was on, I was at the bottleneck position in the hourglass. And that just created a little bit more stress for me. And so, I ended up formally taking a sabbatical from Bear Stearns at 32. I moved to South Florida. I rented an apartment on the beach. And
was it just you at the time?
Just me at the time.
Okay.
And I remember literally for a month, I would sleep until 11:30 in the morning. Wow. I'd wake up, I'd go outside, I'd be kind of like, trying to open my eyes to the bright South Florida sun. I'd take a walk on the beach. I mean, I was just decompressing physiologically.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. That idea of just like, I've heard someone say depressed and deep rest are, like that's what we need. When we get depressed, we actually need to just like step back and regenerate.
I agree. I went through a couple bouts of depression when I lived in New York. I didn't know what it was. I know the experience. I didn't know what it was called. And I read something actually quite recently that said something along the lines of, if you arrive at an episode of depression, be thankful. It's a real gate for growth. And it just kind of reframed the whole context of, what was happening. And, I'm trying to stick this out. I think I've got grit. I ended up having to say,
well, I'm sorry for interrupting, but were you beating yourself up for taking the sabbatical? Like, did you think there's something wrong with me, or did you think there's something wrong with this system and it's not sustainable and I need to get out of it?
I took on let's say the blame and responsibility, because it was very easy. Number one, the whole narrative around getting this job is it's a privilege. I mean, and the numbers haven't really changed. I mean, I would say the acceptance rate, right, for an analyst role is somewhere in the low single digits.
Wow. So you're lucky to be here. Don't screw it up.
You're lucky to be here. Don't screw it up. And I had an experience that kind of provided a little bit of evidence around that. I ended up skipping the MBA route.
Uh-huh.
I stayed an extra year as an analyst and got promoted to associate.
Uh-huh.
And that showed up in a few years, when I got promoted to vice president, because at that point I was now sort of colleagues with a lot of people that had taken 2 years off, went to get their MBA, came back, but they had 5 deals of experience under their belt and I had 20 deals.
Uh-huh.
And so I was like I just had some real world experience and I didn't have 6 figures of debt. So there was this continued reinforcement that I was doing the right thing. I was adhering to the script. Maybe I was even ahead of the script. But, everybody's unique, right? I just didn't have the either the awareness to sort of institute my own healthy health habits. I really neglected my health. The way I would get through the day is coffee and adrenaline. I mean, and stress.
Well, that was the cycle for me. It was like caffeine throughout the day, alcohol at night, because I had to come down from the caffeine.
Yeah, you got to come down.
And I was exhausted when I woke up because of the alcohol.
Yeah. So, alcohol will really perpetuate the negative exacerbation of that cycle because it of how, much it disrupts your sleep. And again,
Exactly.
When you're 20 and 30, you don't.
I was sleep deprived all the time. I didn't even realize it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I was probably, no, not probably. I was sleep deprived and probably dehydrated for a decade.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the idea of, I was having panic attacks. You were going through depression. Mental health just wasn't talked about. And it wasn't even like, I know in my family, if anyone went to see a therapist, it was like they were ridiculed.
Yeah, there's a lot of stigma.
Yeah.
I remember I had, I did enter therapy, and it was truly a frightening thing to start that process because number one, nothing was online, right? I had to somehow obtain my insurance benefit document and figure out, would this be paid for? I didn't want HR to know. I didn't want to tell anybody I was going to an appointment at, 6 p.m. for an hour and I'd be back at I didn't want to explain what I was doing. Right. And the first question,
the idea that 6 p.m. was considered leaving.
That was half day.
Leaving work in the middle of the day, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And I remember the first question I asked the counselor was, "How is this confidential? Can my employer find out? How's this work?" Yeah. And thank God today, I feel like there's still some faulty narratives around mental health, but it is at least talked about and a lot more in the public domain than it was.
So let's go back to Florida. You've rested, you're getting some sunlight, all those things, right? When do you start to think about, okay, what's the next step for me, and how'd that happen for you?
I wish I could paint a prettier picture. It was very disorganized, but a couple things happened for me. And sunlight had a lot to do with it. Number one, I started doing things outside. I hooked up, made a friend down there who was a scuba dive instructor, former college swimmer. He swam competitively, and he invited me to join him for an open water race. It was like a 1 mile ocean water swim. And literally, my swimming was the swimming you learn when you're 4 or 5. So I went to the race with him. I came in, maybe there were 300 people in the race, and I came in like 285. And I was like, oh my God, that was exhausting and thrilling. And it was also embarrassing because I'm a pretty competitive guy. So I was like, how could I come in nearly last? I nerded out on learning how to swim. I hired an instructor, and then he asked me, he says, why are you doing this? And I said, I want to race. And he goes, oh, are you a triathlete? And I said, what's a triathlete?
There we go. That's the light bulb. That's a thing. What?
Yeah. Well, you do 3 sports in a row. And so within a year of moving to South Florida, I was still living off savings. I was kind of discovering this whole endurance sport community. And I made the decision that I wanted to stay down there and live there. Versus coming out of college and saying, I know New York's dangerous. And when I say dangerous, one of my analyst classmates was killed within the first month that I started work after getting mugged.
Wow.
And I remember the apartment I lived in, someone got shot and killed over a drug deal in front of my apartment. Like, it was, if you got off at the wrong subway stop on your way home because you fell asleep, that was dangerous. So it was like, but I don't care because I need to be in New York City to do this career. I flipped that completely. I was like, no matter what, I'm going to stay in South Florida. I'm going to do these things called triathlons. I'm going to go outside. I'm going to be healthy first, and I will figure out the career part. And that, I wish that took shorter than it did. It took a couple years. I ended up starting my own boutique M&A advisory firm.
So were there many boutique M&A advisory firms?
Zero, or I think there was one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, it was like, it was like, yeah, I'm going to start this from my condo and I'm going to see how it goes. And
wow,
that's the part that took a while. I mean, it takes a while to start any business.
Yeah.
But I was early 30s. The only pedigree I had really was I'd spent a decade in New York, and I could point to 2 major Wall Street firms and say, you know, I know what I'm doing. I'm competent, but that's not enough necessarily to jumpstart a business. So it really took me 5 years. I started my own firm. I ran that for 5 years. I got fully engaged in triathlon and other endurance sports. I completed 2 Ironman races, and was really in a great space, kind of physically, and as a result, also mentally. And in my late 30s, I met a guy who had co-founded a small boutique based in New York, and he said, "Hey, I'm not looking to have everybody be in New York. I want investment bankers in different cities because we're going to focus on the mid-market." And he loved that I covered South Florida. So he hired me. The firm is called Morgan Joseph. It's not around anymore. But I ended up joining that and was there for almost a decade. And that's when everything sort of came together. It was like, I can wake up in the morning and do my bicycle training or my swim training. I can still be at the office by 8:30. I can pop out at 5, go do a run.
Yeah.
You know, like everything was integrated at that point.
So it sounds like there was quite a bit of time before that happened. And, you know, I'm recognizing a through line, Mark, in drive and grit and persistence, whether you're talking about your job or even the sports things that you were engaged in. Mm-hmm. Where do you think you got that from?
I'm pretty sure I inherited it from my father. He was he joined the military at age 18, was a drill instructor in the Army. Mm-hmm. So when I grew up learning things like, how do you make a bed so you can flip a quarter on it? How do you shine your shoes? Yeah. You know, like it was just very practically oriented life skills to help you level up. So great stuff to really sort of, let's say, figure out how to do life. But similarly to you, Jeff, you know, what we didn't talk about at home was mental health, emotional homeostasis. Like, you know, that wasn't in the narrative or in the dialogue at home. It was figured out. So the length of time, I mean, even today, when I think back, it took me 5 years to sort of bring everything together. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm almost embarrassed by that because it just seems like a long time to evolve. But the payback for me was when I became a managing director, finally, in my late 30s, I then had almost 20 years of this incredibly self-sustaining energy to really go out and crush it. And what would happen is when I sort of hit my late 40s, early 50s, and I was, you know, most people in professions are approaching or at the peak of their career at that point, they're tired.
Yeah.
I wasn't tired.
Yeah.
I mean, I was excited. You
were just getting started.
I was just getting started. I bought my first, you know, small business as a independent sponsor, you know, in my mid 40s. Like everything stacked up in the right way after that. And I think
so how's that transition happen, Mark, from like being a managing director in this firm to like, and were you doing that at the same time? Or was
I was
this like
doing
a
it at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when did you think, oh, I want to buy a business?
I didn't think that, but it it fell on my
It
lap.
just
So
showed up.
it just showed up. And so,
Yeah.
what I learned, so when this was another part of my own personal evolution that I think is relevant for almost anybody who aspires to, business success, regardless of the business.
Yeah.
When I lived in New York, I would wake up, sometimes startled. Oh, it's late. I got to hustle. Let me go across the street, grab a triple coffee, like get in the office, get planted at my desk. I didn't want to leave, It was a pain in the butt if I had to go down to the lobby to get my takeout food. You're taking me away from my desk.
Yeah.
That mentality, that mode of like isolating work-wise is not how you get successful in a career.
Mm-hmm.
When I moved to South Florida, what I learned was, and I had to really develop this skill set, was you got to go out and meet people.
Yeah.
And so I became this massive networker. I met in bagel shops, coffee shops, restaurant bars, not clubs, but like just about every venue. I met everybody, and I did that for years. And I developed this network of professional acquaintances, colleagues, eventual friends. And as I did that, my business grew.
Mm-hmm.
But I also started seeing other opportunities. Someone would call me and say, hey, I know this guy. He's got a very successful caviar business. Do you want to meet him? I'm like, well, I don't know anything, and I can't sell a caviar business. But let me meet him because I want to see what he's doing.
Yeah.
And so one morning I met with a friend and someone I'd gotten to know professionally in the behavioral health space. And we were having breakfast at this kind of, bagel shop in Miami. And he goes, I want to run something by you. There's this small behavioral health business. It's in Florida. Would you be interested in buying it? And I, started asking questions. How big is it? What does it do? And so on.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I want to go see this business. It was a therapeutic day school. It operated in Central Florida. Revenue was about $4 million. The owner was a large private equity backed corporate, and they wanted to just shut the business down because the margin was like break even.
Uh-huh.
And I go, how much can I buy the business for? And he said, $50,000. I said, why?
Wow.
Why
so you
50?
Did a business with $4 million of revenue.
Yeah.
50 grand.
So I said, why?
Because it's not making them any money.
It's not making them any money.
Yeah.
Maybe 50,000.
Take it off our hands. We don't want
maybe 50,000 was if they could, record that as the transfer, they could, they don't have to take a $50,000 loss because that's the book value of the assets. Like I never found out. I didn't really care.
Yeah.
And I woke up early and I went to bed late, and I went up to visit this school, and I modeled the whole thing out on, Excel on my own. I called insurance brokers, lawyer, like I put this whole thing together. Yeah. And
you're doing all the due diligence yourself.
100%.
Yeah.
And of course, like anything in due diligence, there's a big leap of faith. Mm-hmm. My view was a business at that scale of revenue that's break even. If we could just generate $100,000 a year, that's a huge return. Right. If I lost $50,000, I would, it'd be some form of a mini MBA with real world practical experience.
Yeah. What a great mindset to get into, because I think a lot of people who think about the entrepreneurial path or think about changing careers or whatever, they don't tend to think, well, how do I minimize the downside here? And you're like reframing the downside as like, well, this is education. And you're exactly right. Yeah.
It was. And it ended up, the deal was it was the best deal I've ever done, because we ended up generating like a 7-8% EBITDA margin, and so we were I had a partner in the deal, and we ended up making a couple $100,000 a year each.
Right. Because you got this 4 million, and did the 4 million grow? Did the top line grow?
Actually, the top line shrank over the years because it was a public education contract. And we eventually sold the business. We owned the business for 6 years. We ended up selling it for $50,000. Like, we made the same pitch to someone else, like, just pay us what we paid for it. We took several $1 million of distributions out of the business. But what I really got out of it was I really learned accounting, because I did the accounting. I really learned HR, because I did the benefit design. I did the payroll. Like, I hired a payroll company. Right. But everything I was doing it on my own. I learned about insurance, professional liability, general liability, business interruption. Like, you learn what the nuances are around all these programs. And so I really learned more about business in those 6 years than I did studying business in college and working on Wall Street for.
And you still have your day job while you're doing this?
I still have my day job while I'm doing this. But I will tell you, adopting that second identity as a business owner was like, that was eye-opening. And I finally started to understand and appreciate why so many people are drawn to entrepreneurship. And an example was, I paid the sellers $50,000 to buy the business. I set up a business bank account. I put capital, maybe I put $25,000 in the bank account. Then we started to collect our monthly revenue. And at one point there was, $150,000 in the business bank account. And my accountant's like, why are you keeping that in there? You should distribute that to yourself. And I was like, okay, and maybe I don't remember what my salary was, but that was like several months of salary that we just distributed as partners. And, it was, a mouse click. I mean, it was like, it's easy to sort of overlook the impact of that, but it just opened this whole new world to me about the flexibility and the appeal of being a business owner. And so I stayed a business owner for the next 12 years. I had different investments, and I ended up taking capital from that deal and buying a larger business in 2015 and so on.
Wow. Okay. And so how long were you a managing director with your partner in Florida?
I was, so he was, we had, I forget how many partners in the firm. They were based in New York. I ran the Florida office. I was with that firm for almost a decade. That partner who I really looked up to and considered a mentor passed away. And the firm really struggled after his death. I ended up then moving in 2013. I moved my team over to Oppenheimer, which, it's a longstanding brand name on Wall Street. Been around for well over 100 years. And they did not have a health services team. And so I sort of pitched them on the idea, bring a whole team over in South Florida. And I was with them for 11 years until until 24.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then 24 is the move to, when did you move to Telluride?
I moved to Telluride a year or two before that. So kind of a, quasi step towards, leaving the banking industry. I look back at it. I didn't move around a lot. I had great, but grueling experience in the industry. It is a grueling profession. The truth is, when I look back at my business ownership and investing, I did better doing that in a shorter period of time than I did decades in banking. So I became a full-time investor, a little bit over a year ago, and then also do coaching and mentoring and deal advisory as well. And so for me, it's really, it's the perfect portfolio of how I like to spend my time, right? I'm chasing deals where I'm putting my own capital to work. I'm mentoring CEOs. I'm doing some deal advisory or board stuff. And it's, the one thing that was enjoyable about Wall Street is you're always working on a new project. But the challenge is you can't stop working on a new project. Right? It's like a shark, if a shark doesn't swim, it doesn't breathe.
Yeah. What, you've made a lot of changes and pivots. I end up working with a lot of people. I coach primarily founders and business owners. And one of the things that I've found is as the business grows, as they get more people underneath them, as they get more responsibilities, it becomes harder and harder for them to make those kinds of decisions and changes and pivots and so forth. Because it's like I get stuck in my head, analysis paralysis. How were you able to do that? And what advice would you have, whether it's a founder or even someone who's thinking about changing careers, because you've done that too? Like, how did you know, okay, it's time? Because I'm sure you were scared. I'm sure you didn't know how it was going to work out, but you did it anyway. And I've had moments in my career where I did that too. And there's just something where it's like, okay, it's time. But how would you articulate that for people thinking about
that's a superb question, Jeff, because I think it gets to the essence of how do you evolve your life. It's easy to look back and create a narrative around how my life evolved. The truth is, though, as you well point out, there were moments of extreme anxiety. There were moments I was so overwhelmed that it was like, I'm done. Like I don't care if I'm going to be managing director in 2 months. I can't do it. I'm done. And I eventually got back into the industry, but I got back into it from a different personal foundation. I got back into it a little bit more on my own terms. I did it my way. When I started, probably similarly to you, right, there was the stereotype or the archetype of what is the successful banker, right? It's a certain character, right? And when I started, it was the guy who, and it was a guy who dressed a certain way, wore braces, smoked a cigar, single malt, like that was the archetype. And it was like, well, I'm going to be the archetype who wakes up at 5:30 and rides the bike for 2 hours. That's the stereotype I'm going to put out there. The truth is that the biggest and best decisions I made with help. So getting to a point of burnout, living in New York and then walking off the field was a rash decision that I figured out how to bounce back from. But I told you it took me years to bounce back.
Yeah.
The decisions I made after that, I did with the benefit of a mentor, number one. And he was,
who was your mentor?
I'm sorry?
Who was your mentor? Or did it vary?
Yeah, his name was Bob Sloan. I don't think he practices anymore. When I met Bob, I was in my mid-30s, and I think he was in his mid-50s. And he was, what I think of as a traditional, real world mentor. I don't mean a coach, although coaches today often do a lot of things that mentors have done for centuries. But in this case, he was someone I hired. He had a psychology background. He wasn't a licensed therapist, but he had a PhD in education. And I still today couldn't codify the approach, but I can tell you the outcome. The outcome was deep introspection about, not who am I, but what's the stuff that's not working? What's the stuff I'm doing that is self-destructive or holding me back? And a lot of times those elements are also show up in how we're harming the world. So a great example was when I started working with him, and I ended up working with him for many years, was I would show up late to our meetings, like 10 minutes late.
Yeah.
And I think the third time I did that, he said, hey, I want to check in with you about something. And I said, what's that? And he says, I noticed that every time we're scheduled to meet, you're late 10 minutes. And I was like, oh, there was traffic, or there was this, or there was that. And he was like, I don't think that's it. He said, I think you're telling me F you.
Wow.
And I said, no, this is a guy that I look up to.
Yeah.
He's a bit of a father figure because, he's older than me. He's my mentor, and he's telling me that I'm telling him F you. And as we kind of processed what was going on, he was spot on. And what it was I had built up so much resentment about this kind of, really tough lifestyle that, I volunteered for. But it had just formed, this kind of film of resentment. So what happens is two things can happen when that happens with a person. It's a form of anger, right? I'm pissed off that I'm in this situation. I don't like it.
Right.
And you can get depressed, right? Depression is a form of inward anger, per some theories. Or you can get narcissistic and you can go up. Like I'm entitled and better. I get to do it. I get to take the 10 minutes away from you.
Yeah.
And this is just one example, but it'll show up in your workplace, right? It'll show up in
that whole, the way you show up in one place is the way you show up every place, right?
100%.
So,
and there's things like, I've read books like The Four Agreements and, what's the value of your word? What's the value of your commitment? Like a lot of it is foundationally at the character level. But those are the things that can hold us back. And so another area was like, well, he pressed me on, why'd you pick Wall Street? Well, I want to be successful, going back to this notion of a script.
Right.
Well, what's success for you? Making a lot of money. Why? Is, we sort of, unwove that narrative that I had sort of grown up with unwittingly, that your self-esteem is somehow attached to your income or your net worth or this. And, that's external self-esteem, right? Which is a very precarious form of self-esteem.
Absolutely.
So, saying, there's a certain self-esteem I just have as a human being, that's a very different way to move through the world. So that's a super long-winded response to your question, but
well, I love it, and I want to go a little bit deeper because you mentioned the Four Agreements, and a lot of what you've identified, this search for self-identity, what do I want, scripts, all that, it's got a very spiritual through line to it, like this kind of search for self and meaning, and the way you've been able to create that for yourself in some pretty untraditional ways. First of all, is that right? And secondly, like, what have you learned about yourself and about the world and about success as you've gone through this decades-long process?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. You and I, putting aside that we live in small rural mountain towns, we live in a very individualistic culture. The U.S. is hyper individualistic. A lot of the mentorship and what I think of as elder apprenticeship, right? Apprenticing under an elder. Those are traditions more commonly associated with collectivist societies. And so I think the challenge for people today, and this is probably especially true for younger adults, is how do you navigate because there's nothing wrong with achieving that sort of economic and resource success. But how do you do it without being disconnected, alone? And getting back to your comment about dealing with founders, the irony is the more successful the founder gets, the lonelier they get.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They
There's
don't
no one
have,
to talk to. Yeah.
yeah, they don't have, and that's why, you have groups like Vistage and YPO and these groups that they sort of, somewhat artificially, but they curate, that group mentorship, if you will, or that group community. For me, it was a lot of experimentation. Like I trained, or I hired a mentor, and I found the right person. I did wilderness survival training with a Navy SEAL for a year. Not continuous, but just, like multiple excursions, multiple lessons, like just to get to develop a level of comfort in the outdoors. Today, the average person spends 85% of their life indoors. So today, the challenge is cultivating that mentorship and that community. The irony, and people I think generally know this or they feel it, right, is we're in one of the most hyper-connected ages in history, and yet we're also suffering from the most record levels of depression, anxiety, loneliness, right? And so how does that doesn't sort of make sense, but it does on some level. I think it has to do with balancing individual success versus community. And so some of this I think is well described by David Brooks in his book, The Second Mountain, where, the notion is, and there's a premise in the book, which is that you've been successful climbing your first mountain of conventional success. And now you're, you might be sort of entering the valley of questioning, okay, what do I do with that success? How do I translate that into legacy, altruistic, community sort of focused engagement? But I think that there's a bigger challenge for people today. When you and I started our careers, there were a couple of scripts, right? It was vanilla or chocolate. Right. Today, it's like, what flavor do you want to create when you walk in the ice cream store? Yeah. And that's a real challenge. To your point about being connected, you think about social media, and like it's connected, but it's very superficial connection, right? And it's all about image and presenting and making things look good. And, there's almost no vulnerability. Like I find myself as I get older craving meaningful conversation with people. Like that is the thing that most nourishes me, I think. And I think it's the thing that's been lost in the social media, everything social and Instagram feeds and all this stuff of like, we're not acknowledging how we really feel. I mean, you were talking about mentorship. I grew up in a consulting world where, the phrase that we had was, whose bag are you carrying today? Because the junior consultant would go to the meeting with the senior consultant. And, I remember 2-hour drive, like from Chicago to like South Bend, Indiana, driving with one of these managing consultants who'd been doing this stuff for, they're probably younger than I am now, but they were just like, oh my gosh, they know everything. And just the casual conversation that we would have in the car was so incredibly meaningful. And I don't see that now. I think young people crave it. It's such a natural part of your professional evolution. I know, I can remember like it happened yesterday. There's 3 of us as analysts that are packed into an office, and it's 10 o'clock at night, and we're all like, okay, what snack are you getting? And we all go and come back, and we all knew we were going to be there together for the next 2, 3, 4 hours. And we're BSing, we're joking, right? We're also working, but that camaraderie was very real. And today when you look at the average position tenure for someone in their 20s, right, it's less than 2 years. Part of it might be, I think there's still lots of toxic work cultures. I'm pretty sure that really exists and is a challenge. But a lot of it is, how do you balance remote versus in office, right? If you've made it in your career, do you want to be in the office? And if you're not,
well, and then you got COVID impacting all of that, right?
You have COVID that exacerbated it. And so, I think that nourishment you're talking about is a very human nourishment. It's like an essential ingredient that it's very hard to thrive without. If you look at studies like the very long Harvard happiness study, right? It's not title, income, net worth. It's social connections is the number one determinant of fulfillment and happiness in life. I see that today. I still have, even though I've been out of the industry, what I noticed is how the authenticity of the really good, close professional relationships I had, continues to this day. I still catch up with my former teammates. We still get together when we can. I don't care about hearing about the deals. I want to hear how they're doing.
Right.
And I think in sort of the coaching and mentorship domain, that's a part of it. I mean, a part of it is if there's structure around it, but then there's just the human connection. And you can get that in psychotherapy. But psychotherapy has gotten very structured and professionally regulated around the nature of those relationships. I think coaching and mentorship is a lot more flexible around the nature of the relationship you can foster with your clients. And so it's almost impossible not to grow close to someone or to become friends. That's a harder portion of the value to tease out of it, but it's going back to your comment, it's so core to growth and fulfillment and happiness.
Well, and as we were talking about, a lot of times, there's YPO but the founder, the business owner, the boss, there aren't many people who he or she can talk to who don't have any skin in the game, who aren't trying to get something out of that conversation.
Yeah,
and it's a really hard place to be.
It's a very hard place to be, and it's if you're a conservative, I'm a conservative person from a risk perspective, right? So I tend to think of what's the risk of exposure first, right? And even in YPO, I mean, the one thing I've done facilitating for YPO before. And the thing I didn't love about it was the cutoff at 40. From a human development perspective, right? There's more self-reflection and generativity that is at stake when you're, 55, 50, 60, then at 40. 40, you're still like, let me crush that first mountain.
Exactly.
And so I've been in YPO groups where it just became another forum to compete.
The comparison vibe is definitely strong.
Yeah, it's a lot of alpha energy, and it's like, people might be in radically different industries, but it's like, oh, well, that person's dealing with addiction and I'm not, so look how well I'm doing, type of thing. Like I don't know how much that serves you. There's a lot of great work that happens, but it's just something I noticed. A lot of the mentorship, the things that foster real growth, a lot of it is unstructured, or it happens. It might happen in a coaching relationship, but it might happen in a fantastic conversation between two strangers. This is not something that has ever been structured, right? It's been communal in how it gets passed along.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm encouraged about, I noticed the past the past few clients of mine, for whatever reason, have been a little bit younger. And my theory is, and I've got clients now who are in their 30s, and that used to never happen. And my theory is they're seeing the grind, the impact, the wear and tear, and they're like, how do I figure out how I create this thing in a sustainable way a lot earlier so that I'm not that person in 20
Yeah.
years? And I'm really encouraged by that.
I am too. I've seen my own sort of, examples of that, where I just feel like people that I've gotten to be close to who are in their 30s have it far more figured out than I did in my 30s.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
And, they're doing the calculus of the trajectory. Now I can tell you, when I lived and worked in New York, a lot of the managing directors that I worked for would call their kids at night from their office to say goodnight.
Wow.
Now, I didn't have a family at the time, but I said, I don't think that's the kind of person or father or parent I want to be.
That's not my blueprint. Yeah.
It's not my blueprint. And I remember, because it would happen, 8:30, 9 o'clock. And
yeah,
I'm a director and he's a managing director, and he's on the speakerphone, and I can hear, he's in an office, I'm in a bullpen, and I can hear the conversation. And so I think if you want a reference point, look at the person 5 years ahead of you. Like, it's a real world model.
That's why I left the law firm. Was I was looking at the blueprint and kind of looking at where the partners were and what they were doing and what did they seem to be happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was like, I don't think I want to be that. So how do I change now so that I don't become that?
And by the way, Jeff, my view is I don't stop doing that today. I still do.
Yeah.
I look at the person who's 80 and I'm like, well, what is my trajectory? Do I want to be like this 80-year-old or this 80-year-old or this 65-year-old? Like,
yeah, you want to find those examples, right?
The references are there. And, it all comes down to, you asked great questions around how do you make those big decisions? Mm-hmm. How do you navigate those large question marks? Part of it is I thoroughly believe in this because I didn't really have it in my 20s, but it's mentorship. And that can look a lot of different ways. And then it's habits, right? It's literally the most boring daily habits that will compound without you wanting them to or not. So it's a question of what habits do you adopt, and combining those two things to me are, those are two lenses or sets of blueprints you can sort of develop for yourself to help chart that trajectory.
Yeah, I like to think about it from the, to your example, the 80-year-old, or pick your number of years out, right, and say, okay, if I am that person having, I'm having a conversation with my future self, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What habits did that future self have, and how do I create those today?
Yeah, well, it's such such an enlightening and fun. I go to there's only one real gym here in Telluride. It's a CrossFit gym, and there's a gentleman that I've become friends with. He's in his early 70s. Mm-hmm. Squats, deadlifts, bench press. Wow. And I remember when I first learned how old he was, I was shocked. He's not a big guy, but he is very fit. And recently, he was asking me some pointers about some of these movements. I had earned my barbell instructor certification from Strong First last year, and he was like, "Hey man, can I pick your brain on the squat and this?" And we just had such a fun time. But the open-mindedness and the growth mindset that this guy at 71 had, because he was like, "I'm starting a new squat program." At 71.
That's awesome.
That's
I
awesome.
love that.
That
Well, yeah.
that's my model.
Well, I love that energy and that mindset. That's probably a good place to, as good a place as any to end our
Yeah.
conversation. But for people who want to follow you or reach out to you or, keep tabs on what you're doing, Marc, what's the best way for them to do that?
My only channel these days is LinkedIn.
Uh-huh.
I've developed a personal habit of posting there, mainly for myself. I enjoy creative writing and posting, and
Yeah.
so that's a good place to connect with me, either DM or just connect.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah,
thanks so much for this conversation.
this was great,
It
Jeff.
went some
Wonderful.
unexpected places, and I loved all of
Yeah,
them. And looking forward to talking more to you with you, Marc, and staying connected. And thanks again for coming on the podcast.
I look forward to it, Jeff. Thank you.
All right, take care, everybody. We'll see you next time.